there's going to be a lot of very angry boomers and older Gen Xers who are going to be saying, I paid into this. I deserve it. It's mine. And they're going to say, except due to the cost of living increase and inflation, you've paid into at 1 times and you need 2.8 to 4 times to pay you back. Now you're asking young people to do labor for you. There's no answer there.
Yeah.
The conflict becomes powerful elites who control structures and can influence and guarantee food and resources to younger people who fight and younger people who fight.
Yes.
No, I totally agree on the generational conflict matter, but I don't know if we will have a civil war between the boomers in the villages versus the blue-haired zoomers. Maybe we could have that, but I do agree with your point that whoever pays the military, that's who they're going to serve. And it's going to be the boomers and Gen Xers serving them. But on the automation, I actually have to give some defense of automation because a lot of these jobs that are going to be replaced by automation, that's what we're bringing in the illegals and immigrants to do. I mean, I don't know about the local Taco Bell, but you can go to a lot of Taco Bells, even off the interstate in rural areas, and you'll see somebody who barely speaks English at that job. And you'd probably be, actually, I'd much rather have an AI kiosk to help me there. And that would also, a lot of these people, if they're like, they don't have a job, then they'll go back to Guatemala. So I think actually there are a lot of Americans who are hurt by this, but a lot of the Americans who are hurt are already on the welfare system as is. Now, there's some things that negative that would be impacted, but there's other things that would be positively impacted. Now, on the point of the economic problems, I mean, we've had several severe economic problems throughout our history. You know, throughout the 19th century, Panic of 1837, elsewhere, there was times where people had all their savings wiped out and they could no longer feed themselves. And this was even the case in the Great Depression. People were legitimately starving. The thing about America is that our poorest people are able to be obese, that they're eating too much. And they don't have to worry about food and water. Now, they do have to worry about where they're going to sleep at night and this, but they'll also even have iPhones and all these trinkets that, you know, the poor people who are literally starving in Africa could never dream of. And going to your point about the, you know, with the debt, individual people having debt and all these problems, and then civil war solving that, but that's on the individual level. An individual himself cannot start a civil war. It has to be a large group. And so if a large group, you know, it'd have to be like a state of something, you know, a sizable amount of people, millions of people who all have the same problem, and then saying, okay, this civil war, we're starting that. And generally, if you look at past conflicts, it's either that they feel that their rights are being denied, or that they would like independence for their spot of land, or that there was this grave insult that the majority population of the government paid to their culture of some sort, then they would go along with it. But when these individual problems, bankruptcy or whatever, a lot of these solutions for these individual problems is bankruptcy, but you're suggesting it's actually civil war is the better solution for those problems.
I mean, bankruptcy doesn't solve that you can't feed your 2 small children.
True, but I think in America, pretty much, I mean, the thing is that people find a way to feed their children, whether it's food stamps or anything. We have such a system that we don't really have to worry about the mass starvation of a level that we did in the 19th century.
And I agree with that. My point is saying that when we get to the level where more people have to pay into benefits and do work, when the majority is receiving these benefits, the system is inverted and it can't sustain itself. Then you're gonna find perhaps it's a simple economic collapse. It doesn't necessarily mean everyone's going to go start fighting, but it does mean the system is shattered.
Yeah, it could be a collapse. I think a collapse is a better way of saying it, but we don't know what would happen afterwards. I mean, it'd probably be roving bands of gangs. It's like the Roman Empire with these war bands around. The fall of the Roman Empire is basically MS-13 and Hell's Angels and these gangs just fighting it out over the remnants.
The factor that I believe is on top of all of this is that with all of these issues we are describing, not one single one being a guarantee of civil war, you have to factor in that there are 2 distinct moral worldviews between the right and the left. And when these problems, when the system collapses, when there's an inversion, when you look at the willingness to engage in violence from the left already, then you basically have not one moment, but you have ingredients in a single cauldron, which could be civil war. And again, that's why I'm saying I don't know that I agree. I don't agree that by April it's 1,000 dead people. That being said, the Summer of Love was something like 36 deaths. And that was a period of 4 days. Yeah. So if we get something like that sustained Every 4 days, 30 plus deaths. I don't know. We're going to get to 1,000, but we'll certainly have hundreds.
A couple of things. The first is we're acting as if the historic record doesn't exist, but the reality is the historic record's the only thing we actually have to study. And if you look at the historic record, war is completely normal. If you want to bet over someone's life whether or not there'll be a major war, you should always bet there's going to be a major war in every lifetime. And keep in mind, the bloodiest events in history all occurred within living memory. People who fought in World War II are still and lived through Stalinism and Nazism are still alive today. So we're not better people than we were 70 years ago. And war is
how many
really
of those
normal.
wars have happened within Western Europe and the homeland of America? We've had wars several all throughout the third world, but how many of those wars have taken place in the West?
World War II.
Real quick, sorry, I did some math. If you're saying that by April there will be 1,000 dead, is it fair to say you're including the month of April in that equation?
Yes.
Like, let's say the end of April?
Yes.
If starting today, we had a summer of love style level of violence and has to start today until the end of April, that would be 1,645 deaths. So if we were to cut that by a third and remove 2 months from the equation and start from the end of December, then Rudyard's estimate makes sense if we get summer of love level of violence in December.
1,000 deaths is also nothing. It's difficult to convey that point, but you look at war, and let's say there's a very basic supply chain breakdown. Even stuff like you can't get medical equipment for a few weeks. That's millions of deaths because of millions of people are reliant upon very complex medical systems. If Los Angeles, the port of Los Angeles gets blockaded for a few weeks,
That's blockading it.
So
let me finish the point.
I'm sorry, I got to pause you.
Yeah.
I did the math.
Yeah.
I asked ChatGPT if we were trying to, I said, assuming that the end of April is the end of this calculation,
Yeah.
on what day would violence have to begin in order to reach 1,000 deaths by April? And do you know what that date was? January 6th, 2025.
Let's see what the fates say.
Yeah, what? That I did not
We
see
might
coming.
have a profit here.
I mean, the way war works is, and we're acting as if the world is mathematical and reasonable and rational, and the world really isn't. World War I, there were no deaths, and then 500,000 men died in a few hours. And if there's a war, and we forget how big population numbers are, we could easily have 20 million deaths because you starve out certain cities, you bomb certain areas. People, keep in mind, the part of Germany where my ancestors were from the 30 Years' War, 80% of their population died. Stuff like that's not unreasonable because supply chains are so interdependent and complex. You could very easily have cities starve. People would have no food. They'd have no idea how to forage. Medical equipment's incredibly a lot of people have medical conditions that require very complex supply chains. It's very easy to have lots of people die. And you look at the world wars, again, in living memory, 40 million people died in the Eastern Front. I don't think things will get that ugly, but 1,000 deaths is nothing. That's like a single charge for a single front of infantry in a battle. That's 1,000 deaths in a handful of hours. Or even, you could have 1,000 deaths, a single front of a battle in a half an hour period. This is what the world wars were.
Thanks for watching this clip from the Culture War podcast. We're live every Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, so subscribe and come hang out.